The sky turned green. Not the soft green of spring leaves, or the deep green of pine forests. No, this was something else entirely. Something wrong. And when you've spent 50 years on the Texas coast, you learn to read the sky like other men read newspapers. That green meant trouble was coming, and it was coming fast. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, settle in, friend. Pour yourself another cup of coffee if you've got one handy, or just lean back in that seat and let me take you somewhere. Somewhere the salt air hangs thick in the morning, where the redfish run copper and gold through waters so shallow you can see their tails cutting the surface like little flags. I'm going to tell you about the day everything changed. The day the Texas coast showed me something I'll carry with me until they put me in the ground. My name is Walter James Hensley, Walt to most folks, though my daddy always called me Junior, even though I wasn't technically a junior. Just one of those things fathers do, I suppose. I'm 68 years old now, been fishing these Texas waters since I was 5 years old, and my grandfather first put a rod in my hands. That's 63 years of early mornings, salt-cracked hands, sunburns that turned to leather, and more fish stories than any reasonable man should accumulate in one lifetime. I was born in Rockport, Texas, back in 1955. If you know that stretch of coast, you know it's redfish country. Bull reds, slot reds, rat reds. We had names for all of them. My grandfather, Pawpaw Walt they called him, ran a small charter service out of Fulton Harbor for 40 years. Nothing fancy, just a 24-foot bay boat and a knowledge of those waters that no GPS or fish finder could ever match. He knew where the channels cut through the grass flats, where the oyster reefs hid just beneath the surface, waiting to tear up a prop, where the big bulls liked to congregate when the fall run started. He taught my father, and my father taught me, and I spent 30 years teaching my own son before he moved up to Dallas and traded salt water for spreadsheets. Can't blame him. Times change. People change. But the water stays the same. This story I'm about to tell you happened in September of 1987. I was 32 years old, young enough to still think I knew everything about fishing, and old enough to start suspecting I didn't. It was supposed to be a simple trip. 3 days on the water with my father, fishing the back bays around Port O'Connor like we did every fall when the redfish started schooling up. We've been making that trip together since I was 12 years old. 20 years of tradition. 20 years of father and son time that we both needed more than either of us would ever admit out loud. September of '87. If you're old enough to remember, you might recall that was an interesting time. Reagan was still in office. The stock market was riding high, though it would crash hard about a month later. Folks were starting to talk about this new thing called the Internet, though none of us really understood what it meant. Down on the Texas coast, though, time moved slower. Always has. The tides don't care about politics or economics. The redfish don't read the Wall Street Journal. They just do what they've always done, following the same patterns their ancestors followed 1,000 years ago. Port O'Connor sits at the mouth of the Guadalupe River, where it empties into Matagorda Bay. It's not much to look at, never has been. A handful of boat ramps, some fishing camps, a few restaurants that serve the best fried shrimp you'll ever taste, and miles upon miles of grass flats stretching out in every direction. Back in '87, there were maybe 500 people living there year-round. Probably not much different now. But what Port O'Connor lacks in size, it makes up for in fishing. The bay system there is something special. You've got Espiritu Santo Bay to the south, Matagorda Bay proper to the north and east, and a maze of back lakes and channels connecting everything together. The water runs from crystal clear over white sand to tea-colored where the marsh grass stains it with tannins. And everywhere you look, there are fish. Speckled trout cruise the deeper channels. Flounder bury themselves in the sandy bottoms near the passes. Black drum root around the oyster reefs like underwater pigs. And the redfish, Lord, the redfish. In the fall, when the water starts to cool and the big bulls move into the shallows to feed before winter, you can stand on a poling platform and watch them for miles. Hundreds of fish, thousands sometimes. Their copper backs catching the sunlight, their tails waving above the surface as they root for crabs and shrimp in the grass. That's what we were after. That's what we were always after. The morning of September 15th, 1987, started like any other fishing morning, which is to say, it started in the dark. My alarm went off at 4 a.m. I remember reaching over to shut it off and feeling the cool air on my arm. We were staying at the same fishing camp we always stayed at, a little place called Miller's Fish Camp that's been gone for 20 years now, torn down after a hurricane and never rebuilt. It was nothing special. Plywood walls, a window unit air conditioner that rattled like it was dying, 2 twin beds with mattresses that had seen better days, and a smell that was equal parts mildew, fish, and decades of accumulated memories. I loved that place. I lay there in the dark for a moment, listening. My father was already up. I could hear him in the little kitchenette, the soft clink of a spoon against a coffee cup, the gurgle of the old percolator doing its work. He always beat me awake. Even then, at 61 years old, he was up before dawn like he'd been doing his whole life. Some habits you don't break. You planning on fishing today or just laying there thinking about it? His voice came through the thin walls, and I smiled despite myself. I'm coming, old man. Hold your horses. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Through the window, I could see nothing but black, true dark. The kind of dark you don't get in cities anymore, where the stars look close enough to touch and the Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of light. Somewhere out there, the bay was waiting. I pulled on my clothes in the dark. Same thing I wore every fishing trip. Old khaki pants with a tear in the left knee I'd never bothered to fix. A long-sleeved cotton shirt, light blue, to keep the sun off my arms. My lucky fishing hat, a beat-up Astros cap from the '79 season that was more salt-stained than hat at this point. I'd caught my first bull red wearing that hat. My father had tried to throw it away twice, and twice I'd fished it out of the trash. The kitchen, if you could call it that, was lit by a single bulb hanging from a wire. My father stood at the counter, pouring coffee into a thermos. He looked the same as he always did, tall and lean, skin darkened to permanent bronze from a lifetime in the sun, hands scarred and calloused from decades of handling lines and leaders and hooks. His hair had gone mostly gray by then, but his eyes were still sharp, blue like the sky right before sunset. "Weather radio says we might get some afternoon storms," he said, not looking up. "Nothing serious. Just typical September stuff. Figured as much. Barometer's been dropping since yesterday." He nodded, screwing the cap onto the thermos. "Should make for good fishing this morning. Fish always feed heavy before a front." This was how we talked. Short sentences, weather and water and fish. We didn't do heart-to-heart conversations, my father and I. We didn't talk about feelings or fears, or the complicated tangle of things that happen between fathers and sons over the years. We talked about fishing. And somehow, that was enough. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood at the window, looking out at the nothing. The coffee was strong and bitter, the way my father always made it. I remember thinking it tasted like mornings, like every fishing morning I'd ever had.
"You checked the boat last night?" he asked.
"Fuel's topped off. Bait well's got about 3 dozen live shrimp. I put the spare trolling motor battery in, just in case." Good boy. I was 32 years old, married with a kid of my own, ran my own business, and when my father called me good boy, I still felt something warm in my chest. Some things don't change, no matter how old you get. By 4:30, we were loading gear into my father's truck. The air was warm and heavy, that particular Texas Gulf Coast humidity that wraps around you like a wet blanket. Even in the dark, you could feel the moisture on your skin, smell it in the air. Salt and decay and life all mixed together. The smell of the coast. My father's truck was a 1978 Ford F-150, white once, but faded to something closer to cream. It had 200,000 miles on it and sounded like it was dying every time you started it. But it ran. Behind it sat his boat, a 17-foot shallow sport that he'd bought used in 1982. Nothing fancy by today's standards, but back then it was exactly what we needed. Shallow draft for getting into the back lakes, a 30-horse Evinrude that could push us across the flats without spooking fish, and a poling platform where I'd spent countless hours standing with push-pole in hand, scanning the water for tails. I ran through my mental checklist as we loaded up. Rods. We had 4 of them. 2 7-foot medium-heavy spinning rods rigged with Johnson gold spoons. You couldn't beat a gold spoon for sight casting to redfish. The way they flutter and flash in the water, imitating a wounded baitfish, drives those reds crazy. We also had 2 bait-casting outfits rigged with topwater plugs for the early morning bite. If the fish were aggressive, there was nothing quite like watching a big red explode on a surface lure. The reels were Penn Spinfishers on the spinning rods, 4500 series, workhorses that could handle anything the bay threw at them. The baitcasters were Ambassadors, those old round Swedish reels that were smoother than butter and tough as nails. My father had been using the same Ambassador since 1969. The finish was worn down to bare metal in spots, but it still cast like a dream. For line, we ran 15-pound monofilament on everything. Some folks were starting to use that new braided line back then, but my father didn't trust it. "If I can't stretch it, I don't want it," he always said. Looking back, he probably wasn't wrong. The tackle box was a mess of history. Gold spoons, silver spoons, topwater plugs in every color known to man, soft plastic shrimp and crabs and mullet imitations, jig heads in various weights, leaders, swivels, hooks, and a tangle of mystery items that had been in there so long neither of us remembered what they were for. There was a lure in there that my grandfather had used, a hand-painted wooden plug, red and white, with glass eyes that had gone cloudy with age. I'd never actually fished with it, just liked knowing it was there. "You got the fish grips?" my father asked. I patted my pocket. "Right here." "Landing net?" "In the boat." "Bug spray?" "Forgot it." He shook his head but said nothing, just walked back into the camp and came out a minute later with a can of Off. Some things never change. I could pack every piece of fishing gear we owned and still forget the bug spray. We pulled out of Miller's Fish Camp at 5 a.m., headlights cutting through the dark as we headed toward the boat ramp. The town was dead quiet. A few lights on in the bait shops, someone getting ready for the day's customers, but otherwise nothing moving. Just us and the darkness, and the road stretching ahead. My father drove the way he always drove, slow and steady, both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed straight ahead. The radio was off. It was always off. "Can't hear the engine with that thing on," he'd say, even though there was nothing wrong with the engine. I think he just preferred the silence. Or maybe he preferred the opportunity for silence between us. Those comfortable moments where neither of us had to say anything. I remember looking out the window as we drove, watching the dark shapes of scrub brush and live oaks pass by, thinking about nothing in particular, about the fish we might catch, about my son back home, 3 years old and already asking when Daddy would teach him to fish, about my wife, probably still sleeping, who had learned years ago that fishing weekends were sacred and not to be interrupted, about how lucky I was to still have these moments with my father. I didn't know then how few of them we had left. You never do. The boat ramp at Port O'Connor was empty when we arrived. Not unusual for 5:15 in the morning. Most fishermen don't leave that early, preferring to wait for dawn so they can see where they're going. But my father had never needed daylight to navigate these waters. He knew every channel, every oyster reef, every submerged obstacle by memory. He'd been running these bays since before I was born. We backed the trailer down in silence, the routine so familiar it required no communication. I hopped out to guide him while he watched the mirrors. The boat hit the water with a soft splash, and I grabbed the bow line to hold it steady while he parked the truck and trailer. The air had changed while we were driving. I noticed it as I stood there in the darkness, holding the boat. The humidity seemed heavier somehow, thicker. And there was something else, a stillness that felt unnatural. No bird calls, no splash of mullet jumping, no rustle of wind through the marsh grass. Just silence. I looked up at the sky, still dark, but beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly in the east. And in that faint glow I could see clouds. High clouds, wispy and fast-moving. The kind that meant weather was on the way. "Feel that?" my father asked as he walked down the ramp. "Yeah, air pressure's dropping. Dropping fast." He looked up at the sky, reading it the way he always did. "Might be more than just afternoon storms. You want to stay in?" He gave me a look. The same look he'd been giving me for 32 years whenever I suggested something that went against fishing. "Hell no. Best fishing happens before a front. You know that." I did know that. But something felt different about this morning. Something I couldn't quite name. We loaded into the boat, my father taking the console while I settled into the bow. The Evinrude started on the second pull, coughing once before settling into its familiar rhythm. My father let it warm up for a minute, checking the water coming out of the telltale to make sure the cooling system was working. Then he clicked on the running lights, eased the throttle forward, and we pulled away from the ramp into the darkness. There's something about being on the water before dawn that I've never been able to adequately describe. The world feels different, smaller somehow, and yet infinite at the same time. You can't see the horizons, can't see where the water ends and the land begins. Just the small circle of illumination from your running lights and the vast darkness beyond. It's humbling, peaceful, a little bit frightening if you think about it too hard. My father navigated by instinct and memory. We ran at idle speed through the channel markers, red lights to our right, green to our left, the only other lights in the whole dark world. The boat's wake glowed white with phosphorescence, tiny organisms lighting up as we disturbed them. I watched them trail behind us, little constellations in the water. After about 10 minutes, we cleared the main channel and entered the open bay. My father pushed the throttle forward, and the bow rose as we came up on plane. Wind in my face, salt spray on my lips, the thrum of the engine in my bones. These were the feelings of my childhood, unchanged by time. We ran for maybe 20 minutes, my father making turns that I tried to follow but eventually gave up on. He was taking us somewhere specific, somewhere in that maze of back lakes and shallow flats that only he knew. Finally, the engine slowed, and we dropped off plane. "Tide's about an hour from high," he said, killing the engine. "Fish should be pushing up onto the flat to feed. We'll pole from here." The sudden silence was profound. Just the lap of water against the hull, and the distant call of a night heron waking up somewhere in the marsh. The sky had lightened enough now that I could make out shapes. The dark line of the shoreline to our east, the vast expanse of the flat stretching before us, and above, that strange procession of clouds moving faster than any clouds should move. I climbed up onto the poling platform while my father readied the rods. From up there, maybe 6 feet above the water, I could see farther across the flat. The water was glassy calm, reflecting the lightening sky like a mirror. In an hour, with full daylight, I'd be able to see fish from 100 yards away. But right now, I could barely see the bottom. "Remember what Papa used to say about mornings like this?" I called down. My father chuckled. "When the water goes slick and the birds go quiet, the fish get hungry." Think it's true? Only one way to find out. I pushed us forward with the pole, feeling the bottom through the fiberglass shaft. Soft mud here, maybe 18 inches of water. Perfect redfish territory. Each push sent us gliding silently across the surface. No engine noise to spook the fish, no splash to give away our presence. Just a boat and 2 men moving through the dawn like ghosts. The first colors appeared in the east around 6:15. Pink and orange bleeding up from the horizon, painting the bottoms of those fast-moving clouds. It was beautiful, the way only a Texas coast sunrise can be beautiful. The water caught the colors and threw them back, turning the whole world into shades of fire and gold. For a moment, I forgot about fishing. Just stood there on the platform, pole in hand, watching the day be born. "You gonna fish or you gonna sightsee?" I smiled and went back to pushing. The first fish we saw was a lone redfish, working the edge of the grass line about 60 yards ahead. I spotted the tail first, that distinctive copper flash breaking the surface as the fish rooted headfirst in the mud. My heart rate jumped the way it always did. "Fish, 60 yards, 2 o'clock. My father picked up one of the spinning rods, the one with the gold spoon. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. We'd done this 1,000 times. I angled the boat to close the distance, keeping the sun at our backs so we wouldn't cast a shadow. At 40 yards, I slowed. At 30, I stopped pushing and let us glide. The fish was still there, tail up, feeding hard, unaware. My father made his cast. The spoon arced through the morning air, flashing gold in the new sunlight. It landed maybe 5 feet in front of the fish, hit the water with a soft plop, and began to sink. 1 second, 2 seconds. The tail disappeared. The water bulged as the fish turned. Then the rod bent over hard. "There he is," my father said calmly, as if he'd expected nothing else. The redfish ran for the deeper water, drag screaming, line peeling off the reel. My father let it go, keeping just enough pressure to tire the fish, but not enough to break the line. He'd been doing this for 50 years. He knew exactly how much was too much. I watched from the platform, the way I'd watched him fight 1,000 fish before, His stance was relaxed but ready, rod tip high, following the fish's movements with practiced ease. The sun was fully up now, turning as a proper Texas redfish. My father lifted it from the water with his fish grips, held it for just a moment, then lowered it back. "Not a keeper?" I asked. "We'll catch better. Day's young." He was right, of course. He usually was. I remember thinking, as I pushed us further across the flat, that this was going to be a good day. One of those days you remember years later, when the fish cooperate and the weather holds and everything just feels right. The sky was clearing in the east, the sun warm on my face, the water alive with movement, mullet skipping across the surface. A great blue heron standing motionless in the shallows, waiting for an unwary baitfish. A pair of roseate spoonbills flying overhead, their pink wings catching the light. And we were fishing. Together, like we'd always done. I didn't know it then, but we had maybe 3 hours before everything changed. By 8 o'clock, we'd caught 6 fish. None of them giants, but all of them fun. Good fights on light tackle. That particular rush of adrenaline when the line goes tight and you know you've got something on the other end. My father had caught 4, I'd caught 2, and we'd released them all. We weren't fishing for meat today, just for the fishing itself. The wind had started to pick up around 7:30, coming out of the southeast. Nothing alarming, just enough to put a little chop on the water and make sight casting more difficult. We'd moved from the flat into a protected back lake, working the shorelines where the redfish like to cruise in the morning shade. I remember stopping to eat around 8:30. We pulled the boat up to a small island, nothing more than a shell mound with a few scraggly bushes on it, and sat in the shade eating the sandwiches my father had packed. Bologna and cheese on white bread, wrapped in wax paper the old way. He'd been making the same sandwiches for fishing trips since I was a kid. The bread was always a little soggy by mid-morning, the cheese slightly warm, but they tasted perfect. They tasted like fishing. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" my father asked, looking out at the water. I nodded. 72. I was 17. "You said it was time I learned to read the water instead of just fishing it. Did you learn?" "Still learning." He smiled at that. A real smile, not the half smirk he usually wore. "Me too, son." "Me too." We sat in silence for a while, eating our sandwiches, watching the water. The wind was definitely stronger now, and I noticed those high clouds had been replaced by something lower and darker building in the west. Still distant, but growing. "Storm's coming," I said. "Yep." "Big one?" My father squinted at the western sky, the way he'd squinted at 1,000 skies before, reading the signs, calculating the odds. After a long moment, he shook his head. "Can't tell yet. Might blow through quick. Might be something more. We'll keep an eye on it." Before we continue with what happened next, I want to hear from you, friend. Every fisherman has that one story, that one day on the water they'll never forget. Maybe it was your biggest catch, or the one that got away. Maybe it was a moment with your father, or a sunrise that took your breath away. Whatever it is, I'd love to hear it. Drop your story in the comments below. Let's share these memories together. And if you're enjoying this tale, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more stories where this came from. Fishing legends, mysteries from the water, and tales that deserve to be told. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. We were sitting on that shell island, watching the storm build in the west, not knowing yet what it would bring. Not knowing that in a few hours, everything I thought I knew about the water about fishing, about my own father, was about to change. But that's getting ahead of the story. After our sandwiches, we pushed off from the island and worked our way back toward the main bay. The plan was to fish the afternoon tide change when the water would be moving and the redfish would be active again. We had maybe 3 hours to kill before then. 3 hours to explore the back lakes and maybe find some speckled trout in the deeper channels. The wind was gusting now. 15 miles per hour maybe, with stronger puffs that put whitecaps on the open water. We stayed in the protected areas, letting the marsh grass break the wind. But even there you could feel it. The air had that electric quality that comes before a storm. Charged, expectant, like the world was holding its breath. Around 10 o'clock, we found a school of redfish. I saw them first. We were working the edge of a deep channel where the water dropped from 2 feet to 6 feet in just a few yards. The kind of place where reds like to stage, waiting for baitfish to swim by. And there they were. A ball of maybe 30 fish milling in the deeper water, their backs just visible beneath the surface. "School," I said quietly. 11 o'clock, 50 yards. My father was already reaching for his rod. This was different than sight casting to singles. With a school like this, you had to be more careful. Cast too close and you'd spook the whole group. Cast too far and they'd never see your lure. You had to lead them, put the bait where they were going to be, not where they were. My father made his cast, too short. The spoon landed 10 yards in front of the school, too far for them to notice. "Wind got it," he said, reeling in. He cast again. This time the spoon sailed further, aided by a gust, and landed just ahead of the lead fish. He started his retrieve immediately, fast strips to make the spoon flutter and flash. One of the fish broke from the school, then another. Then the whole group surged forward, and suddenly there were 30 redfish competing for one gold spoon. The rod nearly jumped out of my father's hands. The fish that got there first was not small. It hit the spoon and kept going, running back toward the deeper water with the power of something much bigger than any fish we'd caught that morning. "This one's got some shoulders," my father said, and there was something in his voice I didn't often hear. Excitement. Real excitement. I watched the fight with growing anticipation. The fish was doing things I'd never seen a redfish do, running straight down instead of away, shaking its head so hard you could feel the vibration through the rod, making short, powerful bursts instead of long runs. "That's not a red," I said. "No, I don't think it is." The fish fought for 15 minutes. In the back of my mind, I was aware of the wind picking up, the sky darkening, the temperature dropping. But I couldn't look away from the battle happening in front of me. Finally, the fish began to tire. My father worked it close, pumping and reeling with the patience of decades. And when it finally surfaced, we both just stared. It was a bull red, but it was the biggest bull red I had ever seen. Maybe 40 inches, maybe more. Copper and gold, and somehow larger than life. Like something from a different era. The kind of fish you hear about but never actually see. My father's hands were shaking as he reached for the fish grips. I don't think I'd ever seen his hands shake before. He lifted the fish just enough to get it out of the water. The scales caught what was left of the sunlight and threw it back in 1,000 directions. "Got your camera?" he asked. I reached for the waterproof bag where I kept it, and that's when I looked up. The western sky was green. Not gray, not dark, green. and it was moving toward us faster than anything I'd ever seen. "Dad!" But he'd already seen it. He was lowering the fish back into the water, releasing it without a photo, his eyes fixed on the sky. "We need to go," he said. "Now." The fish disappeared into the depths as my father scrambled for the console. I jumped down from the platform, nearly losing my balance as a gust of wind hit the boat hard enough to heel it over. The engine started on the first pull. My father slammed the throttle forward. And that's when I heard it.
At first, I thought it was the engine, a roaring, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But the engine wasn't that loud. Nothing was that loud. I turned to look at the western sky, at that impossible green, and I saw it. A wall of water, a wall of wind, a curtain of darkness stretching from sky to sea, and it was coming straight for us. The storm wasn't building anymore. The storm was here. So there we were, running flat out across Matagorda Bay with a wall of darkness chasing us. And I learned something about my father that day that I'd never known in 32 years of being his son. He wasn't afraid. Not of the storm, not of that impossible green sky, not of the wall of water and wind bearing down on us, like the hand of God himself reaching across the gulf. His eyes were fixed ahead, one hand on the wheel, one hand on the throttle, and his face showed nothing but concentration, pure, focused concentration. The first gust hit us like a fist. The boat heeled over so hard I grabbed the gunwale with both hands, my feet sliding on the suddenly wet deck. Salt spray exploded over the bow, blinding me for a moment. The engine screamed as the prop came half out of the water, then bit again as we slammed back down. "Hold on!" my father shouted, but I could barely hear him over the wind. I looked back. That wall was closer now, maybe a quarter mile, maybe less. And in front of it, the water had gone white. Not whitecaps, not waves, just white, like the bay itself was being erased. My father cut the wheel hard to port, angling us toward a line of marsh grass I could barely see through the spray. I understood what he was doing. We couldn't outrun this thing, but maybe, just maybe, we could find shelter before it swallowed us whole. The rain hit before we reached the marsh. Not rain like I'd ever felt before. This was horizontal. This was needles. This was the sky opening up and trying to push us under the water through sheer force of will. I ducked my head and squeezed my eyes shut, trusting my father to get us through. The engine changed pitch, slowing. I felt the boat turn, felt the water go calmer beneath us. When I opened my eyes, we were in a narrow cut between two walls of marsh grass, barely wide enough for the boat. The grass bent almost flat in the wind, but it was breaking the worst of it, creating a tunnel of relative calm in the middle of absolute chaos. My father killed the engine. "Get the anchor," he said, already moving toward the bow. I scrambled to help him. We dropped the anchor off the front and the back, stretching lines to clumps of marsh grass on either side, tying off to anything solid we could reach. The boat rocked and bucked in the protected channel, but it stayed put. It stayed afloat, and then all we could do was wait. The storm hit full force about 30 seconds later. Even in our sheltered cut, even with the marsh grass breaking the wind, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. The rain came so thick I couldn't see my father sitting 4 feet away from me. The wind howled through the grass with a sound like a freight train. Lightning split the sky every few seconds, turning the gray world purple and white. My father pulled a tarp from under the console, and we huddled beneath it, backs pressed against the center console, knees drawn up to our chests. The tarp whipped and snapped above us, but it kept the worst of the rain off. Barely. We sat like that for 20 minutes, maybe longer. Time loses meaning when the world is trying to tear itself apart around you. I remember thinking about my wife, my son, wondering if they were watching the weather reports, wondering if they knew where we were, wondering if they'd ever see me again. My father put his hand on my shoulder. "It'll pass," he said, not shouting now, but speaking directly into my ear. "They always pass." And he was right, the way he was always right about the water. Around 11:30, the rain began to ease. The wind dropped from a scream to a howl to a steady blow. The lightning moved off to the east, rumbling like distant artillery. And finally, the sky began to lighten. When we climbed out from under that tarp, I didn't recognize the world. The marsh grass was flattened. Debris floated everywhere. Boards and bottles and tangled masses of vegetation torn loose from somewhere else. The water had turned brown with churned-up mud, and the air smelled different. Clean somehow. Washed. Like the storm had scrubbed everything raw. My father stood at the bow, looking out at the changed landscape. His clothes were soaked. His face was dripping. That old ambassadeur reel was still clipped to his belt, somehow having survived the chaos. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Hell of a blow." "We should head back, make sure the camp's still standing." But he didn't move. He was staring at something in the water ahead of us, past where the marsh grass had been beaten down, out into the main bay. "What is it?" I asked. "Look." I moved up beside him and followed his gaze. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The water out there was dark. Not brown like nearby, but dark. A patch of darkness, maybe 50 yards across, moving slowly through the churned-up bay. Then I saw the fins. Not one fin, not 10 fins, hundreds of fins, maybe thousands, cutting the surface like a forest of copper blades. The biggest school of redfish I had ever seen in my life. The storm had pushed them in. Every redfish in the Gulf, it seemed, had been driven into the bay by that front, pushed into the shallows where they milled and circled, disoriented by the violence of what had just passed. They were everywhere. Everywhere I looked, that water moved with the slow, powerful shapes of big bull reds. My father turned to look at me, and for the first time since the storm began, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't concentration or focus. It was wonder. "Well," he said slowly, "I think we're staying." I should have argued. The smart thing would have been to head back, check on the camp, let everyone know we were okay. But looking at that water, looking at those fish, I knew we weren't going anywhere. We untied the boat in silence. My father moved to the console while I climbed back up onto the poling platform, which was somehow still attached despite everything the storm had thrown at us. The push-pole was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos, so I grabbed a paddle instead. As we emerged from the marsh cut into the open bay, I got a better sense of what we were dealing with. The school wasn't one school. It was multiple schools, pushed together by the storm into a massive aggregation that stretched across the flat as far as I could see. Fish bumped into each other. Tails broke the surface in every direction. The water itself seemed to boil with their movement. My father had already picked up one of the spinning rods.
He was retying the leader, checking the knot with the automatic care of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "Where do you even start?" I said, half to myself. "Same place you always start," my father replied. "Pick one fish and cast to it." Pick one fish out of thousands. Somehow, that made it seem manageable. I spotted a group of larger fish working the edge of the main school. Bulls, every one of them, 30 inches, 40 inches, maybe bigger. They were pushing through the scattered grass, rooting for crabs that the storm had uncovered. 10 o'clock, I said. Edge of the school, big ones. My father nodded and made his cast. The gold spoon arced through the thick gray air and landed with a plop about 5 feet in front of the lead fish. He started his retrieve immediately, that familiar cadence of strip, strip, strip that made the spoon flutter and flash. The fish turned, 3 of them, 4. They surged toward the spoon like they hadn't eaten in weeks. When the rod loaded up, it loaded hard. "That's a good one," my father said, setting the hook with a sharp lift of the rod. The fish ran, not toward the deeper water like they usually do, but straight into the school, line peeling off the reel, other fish scattering. My father leaned back against the pole, trying to turn its head. "He's going to tangle in the school," I said. "I know it." But the fish turned at the last second, breaking right, running parallel to the mass of his brothers. The rod stayed bent. The line stayed tight. After maybe 3 minutes of hard fighting, my father worked the fish close enough for me to see. It was big. Every bit of 35 inches, heavy in the belly, that distinctive bronze color that marked a true bull red. My father lifted it with the grips, held it for just a moment, then lowered it back into the water. "Not keeping it?" I asked. "Can't keep what's not mine," he said. Something in his voice made me think he wasn't just talking about fish. Before I could ask what he meant, he was casting again. And this time, I picked up a rod too. What followed was something I've never experienced before or since. 2 hours of the most incredible fishing of my life. Cast after cast after cast. Fish after fish after fish. We caught them until our arms ached, until our hands were raw from the line, until we were laughing like boys instead of grown men. And through it all, that strange gray sky held above us, not threatening anymore, just watching. Like the storm had done its work and was waiting to see what we would do with the gift it had left behind. Around 1 o'clock, the bite finally began to slow. The school was dispersing, fish moving off in smaller groups as the water settled and the normal rhythms of the bay began to reassert themselves. We'd caught maybe 60 fish between us, maybe more. I'd lost count somewhere around 40. My father set down his rod and stretched his back. He was smiling, actually smiling. A full, genuine smile that I couldn't remember seeing in years. "Hell of a day," he said. "Hell of a storm." Same thing sometimes. We drifted in silence for a while, watching the last of the school move off into the deeper channels. The sky was starting to clear in the west, that post-storm blue bleeding through the gray. The air felt different now, lighter, fresher, like something had been cleaned out of it. My father sat down heavily on the cooler. I realized suddenly how tired he looked. Not just from the fishing, from the storm, from the long morning. Tired in a deeper way. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. "I need to tell you something," he said. Those words. I knew, even before he continued, that something was about to change. Those words never precede good news. "What is it?" He looked out at the water, at the channel where the last few redfish were still moving, at the marsh grass slowly straightening itself after the storm's abuse, at everything except me.
"I'm sick, Junior." The word hung in the air. Sick. Such a small word. 4 letters. But the way he said it. Sick how? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Distant. "Lungs. Spots on the scan. Doc says..." He paused, took a breath. "Doc says maybe a year, maybe less." The world tilted. The boat beneath me suddenly felt unstable, even though the water was calm. I sat down hard on the casting deck, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "When?" I managed. "When did you find out?" "3 weeks ago." 3 weeks. He'd known for 3 weeks and hadn't said anything. Had planned this trip, packed the sandwiches, checked the weather, driven us down to Port O'Connor like everything was normal, like he wasn't carrying that weight. "Why didn't you tell me?" He finally looked at me then. His eyes were bright, wet. I realized I had never seen my father cry, not once in my entire life. "Wanted one more trip first," he said. "One more good trip. Before all the doctor talk and the treatments and the..." He waved his hand vaguely. "All the rest of it." I didn't know what to say. There was nothing to say. So I just sat there, in a boat, floating in a bay that still held a few scattered redfish, under a sky that was slowly clearing after the storm of the century, and I tried to understand that my father was dying. "That's why you released that big one," I said finally. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "Seemed wrong to take anything more than I've already taken. Got plenty of fish in my life. Don't need to be greedy on the way out." We sat in silence for a long time after that. The water lapped against the hull. A pelican flew overhead, somehow having survived the storm. In the distance, I could hear a boat motor, other fishermen finally venturing out now that the weather had passed. "I'm sorry," my father said eventually. "Maybe I should have told you different, told you sooner." "No," I meant it. No, this was right. This was perfect. A storm and a school of fish and... I had to stop, had to swallow the lump in my throat. This was exactly right. He reached over and put his hand on my shoulder, the same gesture he'd made under the tarp when the storm was at its worst. The same gesture he'd been making my whole life, I realized. Every time things got hard, every time I needed to know someone was there. "Still got some fishing left to do," he said. "Water's clearing up. Might be some more fish moving through this afternoon." It was such a dad thing to say, such a Walter Hensley thing to say. Don't dwell, don't wallow. There's still fishing to do. I wiped my eyes and picked up my rod. "Okay," I said. "Let's fish." And we did. The afternoon brought a different kind of fishing. Slower, more deliberate. The massive schools were gone, but individual fish still cruised the edges of the grass lines, still rooted in the newly stirred-up bottom. We sidecast to singles and doubles, taking our time between fish, talking about things we'd never talked about before. My father told me about meeting my mother, about the day I was born, about the hopes he'd had for me, the fears, the pride. He told me about his own father, things I'd never known, struggles and triumphs from a time before I existed. And I listened. I listened to every word. Between stories, we fished.
Not for the numbers anymore, not for the excitement. Just for the being there, together, on the water where we'd always been happiest. Around 4 o'clock, I spotted a fish. It was working alone along a grass line, maybe 60 yards to our left. Bigger than the others we'd been seeing, much bigger. Even from that distance, I could tell this was something special. The push of water in front of it, the size of the tail when it broke the surface. This was a fish measured not in inches, but in pounds. "Dad," I said quietly, but he'd already seen it. He was standing at the console, rod in hand, watching the fish move with the intensity of a hunting cat. "That's a big red," he said. "That's a giant red." The fish was moving parallel to us, working the grass, completely unaware of our presence. If we could get ahead of it, if we could anticipate where it was going, maybe... "I'll paddle us up," I said. "No." My father handed me the rod. "Your fish." I tried to argue, but he was already moving to the platform, picking up the paddle I'd left there earlier. Some arguments you don't win. This was one of them. I moved to the bow, checking my drag, checking my knot, checking everything twice. The spoon at the end of my line suddenly seemed inadequate. The 15-pound mono suddenly seemed like thread. But there was no time to change anything. The fish was moving. My father paddled us forward, reading the fish's direction, anticipating its path. He moved us silently, the paddle entering and leaving the water without a splash. 60 yards became 50. 50 became 40. At 30 yards, I could see the fish clearly. It was the biggest redfish I had ever seen. Maybe 45 inches, maybe more. A true trophy. A fish of a lifetime. A creature that had survived everything the Gulf could throw at it for decades. 20 yards. I raised the rod, started my back cast. The line loaded behind me, the spoon hanging in the air for just a moment before I powered forward. The cast was perfect. Maybe the best cast I'd ever made. The spoon landed 4 feet in front of the fish and began to sink. 1 second, 2 seconds. The fish turned. I started my retrieve. Strip, strip, strip. The spoon fluttered and flashed. The fish accelerated. I saw its mouth open, saw the flash of copper, saw the water bulge as it inhaled the spoon. I set the hook. And then something happened that I didn't expect, that I couldn't have prepared for, that changed everything. The fish didn't run. Instead, it turned. It turned straight toward the boat, swimming directly at us with that spoon in its mouth, line suddenly going slack as it closed the distance. "Reel!" my father shouted. "Reel, reel, reel!" I cranked as fast as I could, trying to keep up with the fish, trying to stay tight. But it was too fast. The line went completely slack. I was reeling against nothing. "I lost it," I said, sick with disappointment. "Keep reeling!" I did, and then the line came tight again. The fish had swum past the boat, under the boat, and now it was running in the opposite direction, toward open water. And I was connected to it again, but at the worst possible angle, the line rubbing against the hull. The fish felt the resistance and panicked. It ran. I've felt big fish run before. I've fought 30-pounders, maybe bigger. But this was different. This was raw power. This was a freight train tied to the end of a thread. The drag screamed. The rod bent into the cork. My hands tightened on the grip until my knuckles went white. "Give her line," my father shouted. Don't fight, just give her line." I loosened the drag, watched the spool empty. 50 yards, 75, 100. At 120 yards, the fish slowed, stopped. I could feel it down there, shaking its head, trying to throw the hook. The rod tip pulsed with each shake. "Now," my father said, "now you work her." I tightened the drag, lifted the rod, took a step back, and I felt the fish resist. Felt its weight, its anger, its determination to be free. I started working the fish the way my grandfather had taught me, the way his grandfather had probably taught him. Pump and reel. Pump and reel. Lift the rod to gain line, then reel down as you lower it. Repeat, repeat, repeat. 100 yards became 90. 90 became 80. The fish ran again. Back to 100. Back to 120. The spool was nearly empty now. If it ran much further, I'd be into the backing. If it ran past that, then not connecting them would be the weakest point. "You've got to turn her," my father said. "Palm the spool if you have to." I pressed my hand against the spinning spool, felt the line burn my palm, felt the fish fight against the storm air. 20 minutes, 30. Time had no meaning. At some point, my father appeared beside me with a bottle of water. I took a drink without ever taking my eyes off the line, without ever stopping the rhythm of pump and reel. "How you doing?" he asked. "Arms are shot." "Fish must be getting tired too." "Doesn't feel like it." He laughed at that. Actually laughed. And despite everything, despite my burning muscles and sweating face, and the fear that at any moment the line would snap, I laughed too. 45 minutes into the fight, the fish showed itself. It came up suddenly, maybe 50 yards out, a flash of copper and gold as it rolled on the surface. I saw its eye. I swear I saw its eye, looking back at me with something like recognition. And then it was down again, running toward the bottom, making me fight all over. But I'd seen it. I'd seen the size. "My God," I said. "Told you it was big." "That's not big. That's—" There wasn't a word for what it was. That fish was something from a dream, from a story, from the kind of legend that old-timers tell when they think no one's listening. It was easily the biggest redfish I'd ever seen, ever imagined, ever thought possible. 50 yards became 40. 40 became 30. The fish was tiring. I could feel it in the softer head shakes, the shorter runs, the way it came up easier when I lifted the rod. But I was tiring too. My arms felt like lead. My hands were cramping around the rod. Every muscle in my body was screaming for rest. "Almost there," my father said. "Almost there." 20 yards. 15. I could see the fish now, a dark shape beneath the surface, still fighting but weakening. My father had the landing net ready, though I doubted the fish would fit. 10 yards. "Slow and easy," my father said. "Don't horse her. Let her come." I lifted the rod. The fish rose toward the surface. For just a moment, I thought it was over. I thought I'd done it. I thought. And then the fish saw the boat. I've heard other fishermen talk about this moment. The moment when a tired fish gets a second wind. The moment when survival instinct overrides exhaustion. The moment when everything you've worked for can slip away in an instant. This was that moment. The fish surged. Not toward open water this time. Toward the boat. Toward the engine. toward the trolling motor, toward anything that might cut the line. I saw it coming, but couldn't stop it. "She's going under!" my father shouted. The fish dove. The line caught on the trolling motor prop. I felt it rub, felt the tension change, felt the sickening vibration of monofilament against metal. I had maybe 2 seconds. I plunged my hand into the water, grabbed the line below where it was rubbing, and lifted. Lifted the line clear of the prop. Lifted it over my head. Felt the fish pull against my grip, the monofilament cutting into my fingers. And then I saw its tail, just for an instant, rising out of the water beside the boat. A tail the size of a dinner plate, maybe bigger, covered in those distinctive spots, more powerful than anything I could have imagined. It slapped the surface once, twice, and then it dove again, taking all my line with it, taking all my strength with it, taking everything I had left to give. The line was screaming off the reel, and my hand was bleeding where the monofilament had cut into my palm. And somewhere in the back of my mind I heard my grandfather's voice, clear as if he were standing right next to me. "Don't fight the fish, boy. Dance with her." I loosened my grip, stopped trying to muscle it. Let the fish run while I caught my breath. Let the rod do the work it was designed to do. The bleeding in my hand slowed to a trickle. The screaming in my shoulders dulled to an ache. The fish felt the change. I swear it did. The run slowed. Stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. Just 2 creatures connected by a thread of monofilament, both exhausted, both wondering what came next. Then I started working again. Pump and reel, pump and reel. Slow this time, patient. The way my father had shown me when I was 12 years old and fighting my first big red in this very bay. 100 yards became 80. 80 became 60. The fish ran again, but shorter this time. 40 yards out, and she stopped, shaking her head, that massive tail slapping the surface in frustration. I could see the spray from where I stood. 50 yards. 40. 30. "She's coming," my father said quietly. He had the net ready, though we both knew a fish this size wouldn't fit in any net we owned. 20 yards. I could see her clearly now, that broad copper back, those powerful shoulders. She was swimming in circles, tired but not beaten. Still fighting, but fighting slower. 15 yards. The rod was bent nearly double. My arms were shaking so bad I could barely hold on. Every muscle in my body screamed for rest. But we were close now. So close. 10 yards. And then she saw the boat again. One last surge, one last desperate attempt at freedom. She dove straight down, pulling line off the reel with a sound like tearing cloth. I braced myself against the gunwale and held on, just held on. Not fighting, not pulling, just refusing to let go. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The run stopped. I felt something change in the way the line moved. A heaviness. A resignation. The fight wasn't over, but something had shifted. The fish was tired. Really tired. And so was I. I started bringing her up, inch by inch, foot by foot. The rod pulsed with each shake of her head, but the shakes were weaker now, the resistance softer. She broke the surface 10 feet from the boat. I've seen a lot of fish in my life, caught thousands, but I had never seen anything like this. She was massive. 46, 47 inches easy, maybe more. Her back was the color of old copper, darkened by age and depth. Her sides gleamed gold in the afternoon light, and those distinctive spots near her tail were the size of silver dollars. She floated there for a moment, exhausted, that great mouth opening and closing as she tried to catch her breath. Our eyes met. I know that sounds crazy. I know fish don't really make eye contact the way people do. But in that moment, looking at that ancient creature, I felt something pass between us. Recognition, maybe. Respect. Two old warriors at the end of a battle, each acknowledging what the other had given. "My God," my father breathed. "Walt, my God." I couldn't speak, couldn't find words for what I was feeling. Pride and exhaustion, and something else. Something deeper, something like gratitude. My father reached down with the fish grips, carefully, gently, got her by the lower lip. The fish didn't fight it, just hung there, spent, as he lifted her head above the water. "Help me get her in the boat," he said. But I was already shaking my head. I don't know when I made the decision. Maybe I'd made it before I even hooked her. Maybe I'd made it years ago, watching my grandfather release a big trout back into the Guadalupe River with the words, "She's got more living to do." Maybe I'd made it the moment my father told me he was dying. "No," I said. "No, let her go." My father looked at me, didn't argue, didn't question, just looked at me with something in his eyes I'd never seen before. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He lowered the fish back into the water, keeping a gentle grip on her lip. She hung there, motionless at first, too tired to swim. I climbed down from the bow and knelt at the gunwale, reaching into the water to support her belly. The scales were cool and smooth against my palm. I could feel her heart beating. Fast at first, then slower as the oxygen flowed back through her gills. "Come on, old girl," I murmured. "Come on. You got more living to do." A minute passed. 2. The fish's tail began to move, slow at first, then stronger. I felt the strength returning to her body, felt her muscles tense, felt her readying herself. "That's it," I said. "That's it." She moved forward, just a few inches at first, testing, then a little more. I let go. For a moment she hung there in the water beside the boat, that great copper shape suspended in the green-brown depths. Then her tail swept once, twice, and she was moving. Swimming away from us, back toward the deeper channel, back toward whatever secret places a fish like that calls home. I watched until I couldn't see her anymore, until she was just a shadow. Then, nothing. Gone. My father put his hand on my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The sun was getting low by then, painting the western sky in shades of orange and red. The storm clouds had moved off to the east, leaving behind that particular clarity that comes after violence. The water was calm. The birds were returning. Somewhere in the marsh, a heron called out, announcing the end of day. We fished for another hour, but my heart wasn't in it. Neither was my father's. We caught a few more reds, smaller ones, and released them all. Then, as the sun touched the horizon, we pulled up the anchor and headed back. The ride home was quiet. Good quiet. The kind of quiet that happens between people who've shared something that doesn't need words. My father ran the boat while I sat in the bow, watching the marsh grass turn gold in the dying light. I thought about a lot of things on that ride. About the fish swimming somewhere in the depths of the bay. About my father steering us home with the same hands that had steered me through 32 years of life. About my grandfather, gone now, but somehow still present in every cast I made, every fish I released, every sunrise I watched over the water. I thought about what my father had told me, about the spots on the scan, about the year, maybe less, about how he'd wanted one more good trip before everything changed. He got more than one. We didn't know it then, but my father would live another 3 years. 3 years of treatments and hospital visits, yes, but also 3 years of fishing. We made that Port O'Connor trip every fall until the end. Never caught another fish like that one. Never expected to. Some fish only come once in a lifetime. He died in the spring of 1990, at home, with my mother holding one hand and me holding the other. His last words were about the water, about how he could hear it even there, even then. I like to think he could. That was 34 years ago. I'm 68 now, same age my father was when he got that first diagnosis. My son has kids of his own, and sometimes, when I'm lucky, I get to take them fishing. We go to Port O'Connor when we can. The bay has changed some. More boats now, more people. Miller's fish camp is gone, but the fish are still there. The redfish still run in the fall, still tail in the shallows, still fight like hell when you hook them. Last October, I was down there with my grandson, 10 years old, same age I was when my grandfather first put a rod in my hands. We were working a grass flat on a calm morning when he spotted a fish, a big one, tailing in the shallows, copper back catching the early light. He made his cast. A little short, but not bad for a beginner. The fish turned, charged the lure. The rod bent over. My grandson's eyes went wide. "Grandpa! Grandpa! I got one!" I moved to help him, then stopped myself. This was his fight, his fish, his moment. "Don't horse her," I said. "Let her run. Be patient." He fought that fish for 15 minutes. Not a monster by any means, maybe 22 inches, but to a 10-year-old boy, it might as well have been a whale. When he finally brought it to hand, when he lifted it from the water and saw it clearly for the first time, the look on his face. I'd seen that look before, in my own mirror, 34 years ago. He wanted to keep it. I could see the desire in his eyes. His first big fish, his trophy. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. He looked at the fish, looked at me, thought about it the way kids think about things, seriously and solemnly. "She's pretty," he said finally. "She is. She probably has babies to make. More fish. Probably." He nodded to himself, some decision being made in that young mind. Then he crouched down at the edge of the boat and lowered the fish into the water, held it there while its strength returned, let it go. We watched it swim away together, grandfather and grandson, past and future connected by this ancient ritual of casting and catching and releasing. "Grandpa," he said. "Yeah? Can we do this again sometime?" I put my hand on his shoulder. The same gesture my father had made to me. The same gesture his father had made to him. The same gesture that men have been making to boys since the first human picked up a stick and tied a line to it. "Anytime you want," I said. "Anytime you want." So that's the story, friend. The storm that changed everything. Not because of the fish, though she was something special. Not because of the fight, though I'll feel it in my shoulders until the day I die. But because of what came after, the conversation with my father, the years we had left, the things we finally said to each other that we'd never found words for before. That's what fishing gives us if we're paying attention. Not just the fish, not just the fight, but the time, the space. The quiet moments on the water, where the things that matter most can finally rise to the surface. I hope you enjoyed this tale. If you did, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. There are plenty more stories where this came from. Tales from the water, legends passed down, and moments that deserve to be remembered. And don't forget, drop your own fishing story in the comments. The one you'll never forget. I read every single one, and your stories might just inspire the next tale I tell. Until next time, tight lines and calm waters. And remember, some fish you keep, some fish you release, but the ones that matter most, those you carry with you forever.